Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Legal HR Summit. The Legal HR Summit is a two-day online event hosted by Ius Laboris, the largest employment law alliance in the world. This session is the last session of the Europe block. I'm now turning over to Emma Richardson to begin the session. Go ahead, Emma, you're welcome to start.
Thank you very much, Isadora. Welcome to this session entitled Are New Workforce Mental Health Challenges in 2020 Stressing You Out? Hopefully this is the session you were expecting and you're now not completely stressed out. My name is Emma Richardson and I'm responsible for HR services to our clients here at Lewis Silkin, with a particular focus on mental well-being and women in the workplace. As we can all recognise, the world is very different to 3 years ago. We have many countries either in lockdown or facing a real prospect of it happening again. Many businesses are facing an uncertain future. The US elections, well, who knows what's happening there, and the UK leaving the EU. This has been an unrelenting storm of issues over the last 3 years, and we are delighted that you have been able to join us. So what I would like to do is just move on and introduce our colleagues. So bear with me whilst I do that, and maybe we can move back to the screen that shows us all on camera. That's super, thank you. So before we start, a couple of housekeeping issues. This session is being recorded so that we can share on our Ius Laboris website, and we want it to be as interactive as possible within the confines of Zoom. So please do use the function, the Q&A function, to ask any questions you have of the panelists. We will be keeping an eye on that for you. We do also have a couple of poll questions, which we are asking you to respond to. I'll be giving you about 15 seconds to respond, so hopefully you'll be able to make a decision pretty quickly, but they are super easy questions. And I wanted to kick off with a question about how you're all feeling right now. Perhaps you can use the chat function to type in a word, just a word about how you're feeling. And I'm going to call these out. It will be a useful way of getting the temperature in our virtual room. It'll be anonymous. And I'm going to start off by saying I'm feeling pretty frenetic. So how are you all feeling right now? We'll just wait for a good, we've got somebody saying stuck. That sounds awful. Somebody saying fine, a little nervous, very stressed, chilled, out of energy, tired. These are all great words. And I think interested, excellent, glad to hear that. So as you can see, a whole range of how we're all feeling at the moment. And I appreciate your participation. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce each of the panelists, Yvonne, Sharon and Vicky. They're going to introduce themselves and then take 2 minutes to explain why mental health and mental well-being is important to them and their organisation. Yvonne, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Definitely. Thank you, Emma. My name is Yvonne Fredriksen. I'm a partner in Norbom Winding, the Ius Laboris law firm in Denmark. My special expertise as an employment lawyer is discrimination law and health and safety at work. Mental well-being at work has had an increased attention in Danish organizations over the last couple of years, partly due to an increased focus by the Danish Working Environment Authority, and partly because Danish employers have realized that it actually pays off to invest in the mental well-being of their employees. Right now, it is especially a hot topic due to the COVID-19 situation and the fact that in Denmark right now, we are experiencing a second Me Too wave, and in fact, an even stronger Me Too wave that we experienced 2-3 years ago. Both factors that are challenging and probably also stressing out HR professionals significantly at the moment, and will undoubtedly affect the mental well-being agenda in Denmark for the coming months. From my perspective as an employment lawyer and as a partner of a law firm, an increased focus on mental well-being is important due to primarily 2 reasons. It will increase the long-term performance in the organization and assist you in attracting and also retaining talent. And it will also assist the organization in the aim to create a truly diverse workforce, especially in regard to gender, mental disabilities, and different personalities. Studies show that if you invest in mental well-being in the workplace, you're more likely to retain employees of different gender and with different personalities, as well as employees with mental disabilities. So a lot of good reasons, strong reasons to actually have a lot of focus on this.
Thank you, Yvonne. Sharon, if I can move to you, please.
Thanks, Emma. So my name is Sharon Toner. I work at Johnson & Johnson and I'm the Employee Health and Wellbeing Lead for the Netherlands. And so embedded in Johnson & Johnson's 75-year-old credo is a clear and very explicit commitment to employee health and well-being. That and our CEO's aspiration to become the world's healthiest workforce are two of the reasons that I was attracted to come and work at Johnson & Johnson. So there's a real recognition that in order to do world-class work, we need to take our health and well-being as seriously as we do any other part of our work. So on a maybe more personal note, 15 years ago, I left the fast-paced, dynamic clinical setting of the intensive care unit in search of a healthier environment to work in. Since then, I've been on a mission to prevent healthy people from becoming ill by co-creating and promoting environments where people can thrive at work. And there's never been a more appropriate time to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And finally, Vicky.
Emma. Hi, I'm Vicky Cotman. I am the workplace lead at Mental Health First Aid England. So we are a social enterprise, but we are an international network of mental health first aid. And we offer evidence-based training and resources to really empower people in and out of workplaces to support their own and each other's mental health and well-being. And I guess for us, we really, and personally, we want to create an unshakable belief that everybody can talk freely about their mental health and seek support when they need it. And well-being should never be considered in isolation of the work that you do or how you are as a person. So personally, why is it so important? We still have a lot of work to do to normalise attitudes and behaviours, I think, around mental health in all areas of society. But personally, I'm hugely passionate about breaking down the stigma and creating workplaces where people really feel that they can thrive and bring their whole self to work.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I'd like to thank the panel for their introductions. And before we go on, I'd like to open a poll question. So again, as I mentioned, you have 15 seconds to respond. The poll question is, your CEO's awareness of mental well-being, is it higher on their agenda now compared to November 2019, about the same, or remains a low priority? If you can vote now, and we will come back to that and the results of that poll in a few moments. I'd now like to hand over to Yvonne, who will give us an overview on how different countries are supporting the wellbeing agenda through legislation. Yvonne.
Thank you, Emma. In a report conducted by JUST Laboris and published earlier this year and covering 37 countries, it showed that 51% of the JUST Laboris firms reported an increased focus on mental health in recent years in their countries. Several countries reported new laws and a growing number of court cases where employees are claiming that the employer is responsible for example, stress and burnout, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. It should be noted that some countries still report that court cases relating to mental health in the workplace are not that well known, or that claims often fail because employees find it hard to meet the burden of proof that there is a connection between the mental health diagnosis and the work environment. On the other hand, a number of countries reported several precedent-setting cases decided in favor of the employees. And just to mention a few examples. In Greece, a recent first instance judgment ruled that an employee's death of a heart attack at home could be considered a work-related accident due to the stress that was caused by a poorly managed restructuring process at work. The employer was therefore ordered to pay compensation to the employee's family. One of the trends that we see in case law in many countries is an increased focus on the potential link between breaches of the working time regulations and work-related stress and burnout. A few examples are mentioned in a recent JUST Laboris report on working time. In that report is, for instance, mentioned a case from Argentina. In that case, the court found in favor of an employee who suffered incapacity as a result of overload and granted the employee compensation. In the Netherlands, an employee who suffered burnout was awarded compensation because the employer had not taken adequate steps to prevent the employee's high stress levels. In the UK, in a case back from 2002, the court found employers offering confidential counseling unlikely to be liable for psychiatric injury caused by work-related stress. But other cases, more recent cases, has shown that employers have actually been found liable despite of offering the employees such a possibility. In addition, a recent decision from the European Court of Justice in a Spanish case against Deutsche Bank reached the conclusion that employers in EU must have an objective, reliable, and accessible system to register working time each day by each worker to ensure compliance with the rules on working time in the EU. A number of EU countries have already implemented initiatives to comply with this decision, whereas others, including Denmark, are still waiting to see the initiatives from the government on this. There is, however, in my opinion, no doubt that in the future we should expect it to be a lot easier for employees to prove that they have worked too much and that the employer is not in compliance with the working time regulation. And this could make it a lot easier for the employees to prove a link between the work and a stress-related health condition. At the same time, many countries are increasingly focusing on the work-life balance of employees. For instance, in Finland, there has been a recent adoption of a new Working Hours Act, aiming to facilitate flexible working and improve work-life balance. Under the new act, average working hours must generally not exceed 40 hours per week over a 4-week reference period. In Sweden, the government is looking at sustainable working life in response to increased issues of stress and burnout. In some countries, for instance, in France, there's been an adoption for certain groups of employees, an explicit right to disconnect. Similarly, in Spain, data protection law provides that employers must consult with employee representatives to design a policy on the right to disconnect and must offer training to employees on how to avoid technological fatigue. And we see that also governments in the Netherlands and in Canada are considering to enact similar regulation. So no doubt that on the legal side, laws, case law, there is an increased focus on mental well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And we've had a couple of questions that have come in, and we will come to those towards the end of the session, but do please keep those questions coming in. I would like to now go to the poll results for the earlier question we asked about the priority for a CEO. And the good news is that this is now, mental wellbeing is now much higher on the CEO's agenda of the group of people who have responded. So thank you very much for that. What I would now like to do is just share some insights about what we have done at Lewis Silkin to support wellbeing agenda over the last 18 months and what our issues our clients are telling us about at Lewis Silkin. So we have run a campaign and it's now no longer a campaign, it's a business as usual philosophy here at Lewis Silkin. The campaign is called Displaced Minds. And if anybody is particularly interested, we can post some information and make that available to you via our website. And there are, I suppose, 7 key elements to our philosophy. The first is creating that great foundation. So making sure you've got all the right policies and procedures, and crucially, and certainly more crucially over the period of lockdown, is making sure that you have the right insurance providers and EAP services. And I noted, Yvonne, the comment that you made that it's no longer an entire defence that you can depend upon having an EAP service, but it's certainly part of the jigsaw puzzle to make sure you've got that great foundation. And finally, making sure that everything is completely accessible. So it could be via an intranet, it could be a paper document, and constantly reminding people of where to access this service, these services, is essential. In terms of communication, be very clear about what you're communicating, use a multimedia approach, and repeat. There is a very fine balance between giving too much information and not enough. And whatever surveys you do, somebody will be telling you that it's too much and somebody will say it's not enough. But go with the majority in terms of that feedback. Surveys, particularly pulse surveys, are a particularly useful way to enhance communication, both inbound and outbound. The tone from the top becomes exceptionally important. You need people to be role modeling the right behavior. So not requesting urgent pieces of work to be done at 11 o'clock at night. And also for those individuals who are senior to share their experiences, mental well-being. These can be anonymous, and we ran a similar process here in Lewis Silkin, and we had some people who were very upfront about their experience of mental well-being, either themselves or in their family. Some were posted anonymously via a blog, and others were posted and the person was named. This was how we kicked off the campaign in 2019, and it opened the floodgates in terms of the communication that people then took up about their own mental well-being journey. In terms of data, what you really do need to know is, where are you right now in terms of the mental well-being of your employees? So what data do you have? And you might have more than you think you do. So it could be from your insurance provider, there could be some confidential surveys, you could do listening exercises so that you're actually understanding how people are feeling right now. You would need to set that up carefully, but we find all of this data really helps shape what we do next. I think the other piece is good digital boundaries. So again, leading by example. So set parameters for your routines, step away from your devices, get good sleep, avoid the news cycle, no matter how interested you are in the US elections, and open the windows. Today, like on a day like today in the UK, the sun is shining, open the windows, get that fresh air in. I think that the 6th step that we would recommend is creating a great support network. Don't just rely on your line manager. Think about all the friends, family, and colleagues that you can rely upon when you're feeling low, or when you genuinely have some work that you need support in. And I think finally, my final step is saying that doing nothing is absolutely okay. You need to focus on getting good sleep, having mindfulness moments, but sitting down and doing nothing is acceptable. And I think for very busy people, that can be a real difficult thing to do. So thank you for that. That's my story from Lewis Silkin. We have got another poll question for you. And this poll question is, has the budget for mental well-being increased in the last 12 months, stayed the same, or decreased? Again, if you can vote on that, that would be fantastic. And we will come to those results shortly. I would now like to hand over to Vicky, who will share her knowledge and insight on mental well-being. Vicky, over to you.
Thanks, Emma. Well, absolutely. I think as we've already covered, I think the pandemic in itself has certainly put a big spotlight on mental health and well-being, and it's not too much of a surprise to kind of see the results that, and it's great to see that actually it has really increased on the agenda in boardrooms for organisations. So we do know that the pandemic has created a tidal wave of change for everybody, and that is naturally going to have had a huge impact on mental health. We know there have also been higher levels of mental illness during this time. So the Centre of Mental Health actually estimated that 500,000 more people are experiencing mental ill health than average in the wake of the pandemic. So that's a huge increase in terms of how people are feeling at the moment. And I think with the impact for both employers and employees, we're all working very differently. We're all working remotely. We thought that might be a short-term adjustment. We're still absolutely having to work with partners, pets and children around us as we try and do our full hours of work. And that's going to be taking its toll on how people are feeling. And I think especially as we go into winter, and we've in the UK, we've just started a second lockdown as well. It's really important, and I think, Emma, to reference your previous point, to really check in on how you're feeling and making sure that you are doing regular wellbeing check-ins to understand how you might be feeling, not just with the stresses and pressures of work, but in terms of the overwhelm of, I think, of what's going on in the world at the moment. And I think digital wellbeing is something that has really increased in conversation that we've seen. So I think before the pandemic and COVID-19, we had created a 24/7 always on culture. People worked all hours of the day. Working days were getting longer, but I think those boundaries between working from home and always being online, connecting with your colleagues, and constantly being, we call it the Zoom fatigue, everybody staring at their screen for longer, not having your commute to decompress, will also be kind of having an impact. And I think it's really, really important that organisations and workplaces are absolutely setting those boundaries, but finding the balance of making sure that you're staying connected with colleagues in the right way. I think social connection at work is hugely important during this time. And how do you do that? By making sure that you're also not overworking and your working day doesn't extend into the evenings, and you're taking those breaks. So I think as part of that, organisations promoting self-care. What does really good self-care look like? What tools and resources do you have internally and externally for your employees to use? Will be really, really key. I think one of the things that we share is you can't pour from an empty cup. So when you are looking to support your colleagues or your family and friends, it's really, really important that you check in on your own well-being, because you have to make sure you're feeling well enough in the first place to do so, and before you support somebody else. So we actually have a couple of tools at MHFA England that are really useful if anybody wants that to use. One is our weekly wellbeing check-in. It's a fantastic tool to use to kind of ask yourself the right questions in terms of how you're feeling. And the other one is our stress container, something that you can use individually, or a fantastic tool that you can take away and use with your teams as a bit of a talking point in team meetings, to really just check in terms of how everybody's feeling during this time, and understand what stress and pressure they may be under. But I think with all of that, it's about making sure that even during this time, and even though we're working very differently, that everybody still has that opportunity to thrive at work, and organisations are still putting wellbeing and mental health at the heart of what they do, and making sure that it's a core part of their strategy. It's not just seen as a nice to have. And I think one of the positives that has come out of the current situation is people are realising that mental health does not discriminate. It will impact everybody. And therefore, you have to implement wellbeing as part of everything we do, rather than more of a tick box exercise. But it's really important alongside that it reflects the nature of your organisation in terms of your approach, and there isn't a one size fits all. So there is a bit of work to do to make sure that it's really reflective of the organisation, the people and the culture that you work in. The organisations that I guess we have seen been really successful with this have taken what we call a whole organisation approach. So there isn't just one thing that's implemented in isolation. It has to be considered across all levels of the organisation. Absolutely, to your point, Emma, it has to be a boardroom issue. It has to be put on par with physical health as well. We want to make sure that you raise mental health awareness and normalise the idea of talking about it before you introduce any plans and communicate them out, because you want to create that open culture where people feel that they can talk about it and not be judged, or it might not kind of allow them to progress or have opportunities given to them because of it. And I think it's also really important that part of a wellbeing strategy that it's considered alongside everything else. So your physical, financial, emotional well-being. Mental health doesn't also stand in isolation either. It feeds into so many things. And I guess for organisations, we know that well-being is good for business. Healthy people tend to be happier, they're more engaged and they're more productive, and we have to make sure that's part of an inclusive approach as well. So what I'd say, if I was to summarise, there is no silver bullet. You have to make sure that you kind of are taking your time to make sure it really applies to your organisation to take that best approach. Make sure it's kind of weaved into everything you do, your diversity and inclusion, you're looking at your financial well-being, where you're signposting to and what your internal resources are. And self-care, I think during this time, if there's one thing to take away, it is making sure that you're not pouring from an empty cup, and that self-care is promoted widely amongst family, friends, and more importantly, your colleagues too.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to take a quick look at these poll results for the poll that we just had. And so from a budget point of view, staying the same is the overwhelming majority at 75%, which is obviously a little bit disappointing given what everybody is going through. But what I would like to now do is hand over to Sharon. Sharon, are you surprised at that result?
I think, like you just said, yeah, it is a little disappointing, right? Because I think we're going to need a whole lot more resources, and we need to move forward. So in order to move forward, we also need to be able to finance it. So yeah, maybe it's a lagging shift, and it'll come. Yeah.
And so if I can now more formally hand over to you, can you share with us your Johnson & Johnson wellbeing journey, both here and overseas? We'd be interested to hear that.
Sure, thanks, Emma. So our Johnson & Johnson Global Health and Wellbeing Strategy focuses on a holistic approach and includes all the elements that you'd expect in a health and wellbeing program, like nutrition, physical activity, and mental health. But I think what stands out for me at Johnson & Johnson is the company's commitment to train all Johnson & Johnson employees in the principles of energy management before the end of 2020. So this program is rooted in the science of performance psychology, exercise physiology, and nutrition. And there's a clear takeaway message. We can't create more time in our days, but we can create more energy. So aspects of managing mental well-being are also included in the program. And there's a focus on defining purpose or redefining purpose and values, building resilience, and integrating rest and recharge time into our day-to-day. For some program, this has been life-changing. For some people, this program has been life-changing. For others, there have been plenty of aha moments. And a final element to our health and wellbeing strategy is a Vitality app where employees can track movement, sleep, eating habits. You can check out what the latest health webinars are. You can also check out the number of the employee assistance provider or your occupational health physician. You can even set up short Vitality challenges with small teams. So plenty of excellent resources, but the biggest challenge, irrespective of industry, is changing mindset and behaviors. And health and well-being is a cultural journey. And as we all know, cultural journeys take a long time. It's a long road. And what's the saying? You can bring the horse to the water trough, but you can't make him drink. And then the pandemic hit. And it hit us by force and thrust us all into personal and organizational agility. It's been messy, it's been disruptive, uncomfortable, but we've discovered that we're actually far more agile and resilient than we believed. So if I maybe talk to 3 things that I noticed that have changed in, let's say, the last year, my top 3 would be, if I start with number 1, what I think has really been a considerable change is how we look at our health and well-being. The pandemic has forced us to cut through the clutter, and people have prioritized what matters most, their health and their families. So as the pandemic's evolved, there's a sense of openness and curiosity to exploring how we can work differently. We're looking at how we can integrate work and life in a way that we can live healthier, feel more energetic and balanced. So conversations have evolved from, I don't even have time to take my lunch break, to I started to take lunch walks, or I've checked into the 2 p.m. yoga stretch session. Many of us have replaced our commutes with either a morning walk or run or yoga or something more nourishing than a commute. Positive well-being behaviors and healthy habits play a huge role in proactively protecting our mental and emotional well-being. But we all adapt to change at our own pace. So I do want to acknowledge that there are still people struggling, missing the physical connection and the dynamic of the workplace. Some people feel isolated and disconnected. As many of us have experienced a second lockdown, feelings of hope that we'll see our colleagues soon have diminished. And that's hard for many of us. But overall, I feel we've had a wake-up call about how we want to live and work. So the second thing I'd like to touch on is leading teams in times of COVID. So I think that being a team leader can be challenging at the best of times, rewarding and challenging at the best of times, but leading teams through a global pandemic while we all work virtually is incredibly challenging. So we've had people leaders approach us with this concern of, okay, so I need to keep my people engaged, motivated, we need to stay connected, and how do I know how they're doing? So there's been, and it's a bit like Vicky mentioned, we've literally had to have conversations with one another on how do we enable check-ins in the virtual world. We need to do a little bit more than how you doing, check out body language. It needs to be a little bit more of a robust and an in-depth check-in than just the usual, how are you? So I think that that is something that we really need to keep an eye on, and it calls for, yeah, more creativity and I think more of a robust approach. And the third thing that I've actually heard in both the conversations from Emma and Vicky are a change in how we see our leaders engaging employees on the topic of health and well-being. So when I started at Johnson & Johnson 2.5 years ago, I felt welcome at the senior leadership meetings, but more often than not, it was me that preempted putting health and well-being on the agenda. These days, health and well-being has got full focus and engagement and attention of our most senior leaders. And in some ways, I think that the pandemic has become an enabler for leaders to speak about health and mental well-being. It's enabled them to not only show up as leaders, but as role models, as humans with vulnerability. So to answer the question on whether workforce mental health challenges are stressing me out, it's a no from me. we have full focus and leadership engagement and the opportunity to make the changes that we need, both individually and collectively, to create the environments that we need to thrive in and not just survive in. Thanks.
Sharon, thank you very much. We'll come back to some of that, and we've got a few questions coming in, so we'll come to those in just a moment. But now I'd like to launch our final poll. So the question is your organisation using external providers to deliver training and awareness on mental well-being, or are you sticking to internal resources to meet that need? So just a few seconds to respond to that. But before we come to those results, I just wanted to turn our attention to some of the questions that have been posted, and please do keep these coming in. The first question that has been posted, I'm going to direct this towards Yvonne, is where there is already pressure on employees to take on additional work beyond agreed hours, do you think that there is a real risk that employees will underreport and then employers could then point towards these hours recorded as a defence? Do you think there's going to be some kind of pressure for individuals to not be truthful on their recording of hours? Yvonne, over to you.
I think, yes, there's a risk of that, definitely. And that is really the challenge then for the organizations to actually make it okay to report the actual hours worked. But of course, yes, if you have an employee who's very keen on performing, but knows that it will be a problem if the person is working too much, and that will be, you know, an issue in the performance review, definitely there's a risk. And I think that is something that management need to focus a lot on, that there will be an underreporting of time. We are actually dealing with that issue also in our organization, and this is something that we speak openly about. It's easy when you are in an organization where most people work in the office, because then you can see, well, that person is always there. But when you look at the hours, it doesn't look like that. So in that sense, it will be, you know, very open and clear. It's making it a lot more difficult in this situation with the COVID-19, where so many people work from home, because it's more difficult. But again, you should of course note then, when are you receiving emails? Are the employee responding, you know, immediately after you as a manager send the email? All these signals should of course be noted by the manager. But yes, there is a risk, definitely.
Yeah. And Vicky, just a similar but linked question in and around presenteeism. Are you seeing a very different approach to individuals wanting to be constantly present? Do you see that with the clients that you're working with, or do you think presenteeism is most definitely alive and well still?
I would say it's definitely still alive and well still. If anything, I think sometimes people feel when they cannot be seen in an office that they have to be seen even more so online, to show that they are there, that they can be trusted to work from home. And I think organisations across the board still have a small step to make in ensuring that flexible working is fully embraced. There is absolutely trust there between leadership and employees to say you can work from anywhere around the hours, and it's to do with your output and we trust you to do it. I don't think all organisations are there quite yet, but I think we definitely have made big steps in the right direction. But in terms of your question, I think presenteeism is still very much there.
Thank you. We've had another question which I'll direct to you, Sharon. In and around people working from home, recognising that it's still important that their direct leader is enabled on how and what to communicate and when in terms of a daily basis, so that we're getting the right behaviours, the right attitudes to keep the engagement high rather than it decreasing. And the person who's raised the question has talked about leadership being important again, but how do you see that, the kind of the communication style being balanced in a way to help people working from home?
Look, I think communications is always important, but now more than ever, when we go through a period of such enormous change and uncertainty, communication is possibly one of the most important ingredients in helping people manage stress. And I think if I look at our situation in Johnson & Johnson, I actually think that we created a little bit of a communication tsunami when we had the first COVID crisis. We were so focused on communicating that I think that we actually, in fact, I know, because we got this back in surveys, that while people appreciated the communications, it felt a bit like an avalanche. So I think that finding the balance in communications is challenging, but I do believe that over communicating is probably a bit better than not communicating at all, or not communicating enough, because what you get then is people start to fill in the blanks for themselves and maybe start to worry about something that's not happening or not going to happen. So I think communication's absolutely key. And I think it's also important as leaders to check in with employees and find out how they find the communications. Is it enough? Is it not enough? What do employees want to hear, and how do they want to receive it? Once again, it's one of those things, it's not a sort of a one size fits all. We also consume information differently. So a vitally important topic, and one that I believe is challenging to get perfectly right, but I'm more for slightly over communicating than not communicating enough.
Yeah, I think my experience here at Lewis Silkin has been very similar. We probably overdid it a little bit to start off with, and we've now kind of got that balance. And the response has just been put through on the chat saying it's not the amount of communication, but how and what is said. So it's the quality of that communication rather than the quantity, which I do absolutely agree with. But I think it's also putting it out on multimedia channels, because, as you say, Sharon, different people absorb information in different ways. I just want to go back to the poll results to see what people are responding to in terms of that poll. So a little bit closer than I was expecting. So 32% delivering training is via external providers, and 68% are using internal resources. So that also means that puts a huge amount of pressure on internal training teams and people responsible for mental health and well-being to be able to deliver content that is useful and applicable to everyone, no matter what their journey is. And indeed, picking up on the boats that we had at the beginning, we're all in this same storm, but we're all in different boats, so our experience is very different. Somebody else has just posted a comment that they think that direct and open communication between people, managers and employees is the most important, because they can personalize it and know that the wishes of the employees are being taken note of. I completely agree with that. And we do need to give the tools, the right tools to our employees to be able to be good managers. I'm also in the camp that says that not every manager is gifted with that particular skill set, and there is only so much that you can teach. So I think encouraging people to develop a support network that sits outside of their direct line manager will make sure that if there isn't a good relationship between line manager and employee, the employee can still feel that they are being supported. We're kind of fast running out of time, but I just wanted to come back to each of you. You've got like 30 seconds to give a top tip on managing well-being. Vicky,
Does it matter?
to you.
Pardon me?
I'll go with you, Sharon.
Okay. Oh, well, I mean, I absolutely lead by example. So I have weeks where I do fantastically, and I have weeks that I'm not so good. But generally speaking, yeah, we're the role models. We need to lead by example. Yeah.
Thank you. Yvonne, what's your top tip?
Yeah, and really, Sharon, you said it already, because mine was walk the talk. You could talk as much about mental well-being in your organization. If you as a manager don't walk the talk, don't dare to talk about yourself as a person, as a private person, and how you're doing, how your children are doing, how your parents are doing, you're not, really walking the talk. So yes, very important.
And Vicky, finally.
Yeah, I agree. I would just say, and in terms of a wellbeing and mental health approach, just make sure it is at all layers of the organisation. So you're engaging the wider workforce. It is absolutely a boardroom issue, and your line managers feel empowered to have the conversation and have the skills to do it.
Lovely. Well, thank you, panelists, for a very interactive and energetic session. I'm going to leave everybody with the quote from Vicky, which is, "You cannot pour from an empty cup." So please, everybody, look after yourselves to make sure that you can look after others. Thank you all very much for your participation.
Thank you, Emma. We have now reached the end of the session, but the Legal HR Summit is not over yet. We're going to continue later with other regional sessions for the Americas. On your screens, you can see the title of the next sessions. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending this session, and thanks also to our panelists for their very healthy insights. So with that, this session will now be ending, and I hope to see you at the next one. Bye-bye. Thank you.